Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest is Joan Michelson. She has an MBA, and she's also an award-winning business and communications leader. She's a public speaker and the host of the acclaimed podcast series, Green Connections Radio. In 2015, her broadcast was one of the top 6 podcasts selected by USA Today, especially for business travelers. She joins us this morning to talk about her journey in promoting not only green connections, but empowering women to live and be their very best selves. All the way from Alexandria, Virginia, we welcome Joan Michelson. Joan, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. You have a plethora of accolades and credits connected to your work. I want you to start by talking about the journey and how you started in broadcasting.
Well, I make the joke actually that I was born into this industry because my dad had an advertising agency when I was a kid in New York City. And he used to write broadcast copy, among other things. And so I'm the youngest of 4, and he would literally pull copy out of the typewriter, hand it to the closest warm body he could find, and say, "Here, read this out loud to me." So and my mother did this when I was in the womb. So I've literally been reading and writing copy forever. And then I've gone back and forth between corporate communications, the marketing side, and journalism. And I worked in broadcast journalism in news magazine shows. I worked in 60 Minutes. I worked with Primetime Live on ABC and some other shows, like a show called The Crusaders, which you would have probably liked because we got involved. Mm-hmm. We called it 60 Minutes Plus a Solution, where we would help people solve challenges that were pretty obvious. And we can talk about those if you like.
Sure. Tell me about your time at 60 Minutes. What was that experience like for you, and what were your takeaways?
Well, I was in the Los Angeles bureau, so we were not in the throes of New York. I'm a native New York City girl, as I said, but this happened to be in Los Angeles. And you work on teams with a particular correspondent. So I worked with Ed Bradley, who was terrific.
The late Ed Bradley.
The late great Ed Bradley. Mm-hmm. And we did amazing stories. One story we did was on a woman whose daughter was killed by a drive-by shooting, and she channeled her anger and hurt into going and talking to people, inmates in prison, and saying, "Here's who your victims really are. It's me." And she brought pictures. Mm. But one of the most compelling stories we did was on the hazards of monosodium glutamate, which became one of the most popular stories at 60 Minutes. And it's an interesting story about this personally, because when I was a kid, my father was adamantly against monosodium glutamate.
And tell us what that is.
Monosodium glutamate is MSG. You see it in food products all the time. And it's actually what's called an excitotoxin. It works on your body, not on the food. It's like salt changes the food. This stuff actually, it works when it hits your tongue. And so it actually has a chemical reaction in your body. Monosodium glutamate is the salty version. Aspartame is the sweet version. So it's really bad for a lot of people. You can have a very severe reaction to it. And he hated food additives, my dad, and barred it, even though he loved Chinese food, which was used MSG a lot at the time. But my father died very, very suddenly. And I was at 60 Minutes. I came back to work, and there's a package on my desk with a note from Ed that says, "See if there's a story in here." So I open it up, and Carlette, it was a book called No MSG, The Chinese Food Syndrome.
Oh, wow.
And I started to shake, and I went running into my senior producer's office, and I said, "Grace, this was my father's cause célèbre." And she just looked at me, she goes, "Open it up and see if there's a story in there." And we did an amazing story about how kids were being diagnosed as ADHD and put on horrible drugs like Ritalin when they just had too much crap in their diet.
Wow.
And it was life-changing.
And so you got an opportunity to be a part of producing and telling great stories on the journalism side. And then you vacillate between two worlds. When do you make a decision that you're going to move into broadcasting for yourself?
Well, as you well know, life is a journey and it takes you in different directions. And so I was finding that I was getting, frankly, more than better paying work on the corporate side. So you're telling stories on the corporate side also. But what I would do is what I call corporate journalism, where it's really news on the corporate side. You're just talking about things that are relevant to their work, right? So I kept getting recruited by companies to go work there, and I was moved around the country several times. And I got into the green space when I was doing reporting and public speaking here in DC again. And I met a bunch of people, make a long story short, and I ended up being at a meeting with the president of this division. I had no idea who I was talking to. And he turned out to be the president of the electric car division of Chrysler. And the next morning he called me and started recruiting me and said, "Are you happy? I had more great ideas talking to you in 15 minutes than I've had from other people in years. Carlette, I didn't own a car. I didn't have automotive in my resume. I've never worked in the car business. You wouldn't find vehicle anywhere. I was an urban girl, and they moved me to the Midwest and catapulted me into the green economy, and I haven't looked back since."
Wow. So tell me about that leap of faith, really. You don't know anything about the business. You don't know what you're going into, but you say, "I'm going to take a chance." What went into that process for you?
It's really intuition. It's having had the opportunity to talk to these people and get a sense when so often in this world, people hire people because they're looking to check off a list of qualifications. But when somebody meets you and says, "I like what you brought to the table here, and I think that we could collaborate, and I don't care that you haven't worked in this industry. In fact, I think that's a good thing," it just seems like a no-brainer. And frankly, I'm a courageous person. I don't, one of the things that I write about a lot in Forbes and I talk about on my show and I'm writing about it in a book too, is you have to know an opportunity when it's in front of you, and you have to have the courage to take that opportunity. I have a tendency to overthink things, but my intuition was, this sounds really cool because I love stretch. I love to have people who make me think differently. I would be learning a huge amount, and I could tell that right away. And he was great, and that's the president of the company, so it's not like
it's really a no-brainer. I mean, really.
Yeah, and they were moving me, so and it was a full-time gig. So in fact, it was an interesting moment because I had been talking to a prominent news organization about going to work with them also. And we had been in discussions for several months and nothing had really hit the table. And then I got this offer to move to the Midwest. And I still hadn't heard from those people, and I didn't, I was just, waiting. I didn't know what they were going to do. Mm-hmm. So I move, and 3 months after I'm there, these news people call me and say, "Hey, can you do blah, blah, we'd like to offer you to do X, Y, and Z." But I would have had to come back to the East Coast and they weren't going to move me. It would be more money for that period of time and in broadcasting. But it was really, it wasn't, it wasn't a full-time gig. They weren't going to pay my move,
and it wasn't lucrative. It probably wasn't going to be worth the challenges to get back to the East Coast.
Yeah, but right, exactly. And that's a decision point, right? It's like, well, I really wanted to, it's one of those times when you sort of have to let go of what you thought you wanted before mm-hmm. and embrace where you are now.
I love it. And so before we went to the break, Joan, you were talking about this journey. And when you understood and began to find out the importance of green connections, I guess in some ways that probably changed the trajectory of your life.
That's true. And in fact, when I was recruited by Chrysler to head up the communications and co-head the sales and marketing of their electric car division, as I said before the break, I didn't even own a car. I'd never been in the car business. But I loved the fact that this was incredibly smart people in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, who were creating a really cool product that everybody could use, that was making the world a better place. And frankly, people could make money doing this, right? And could integrate, and it's saving the planet. It's helping, there's no downside. It's character, it's purpose, it's profit, it's profit for everybody, really, along the line, including for the planet. But the piece that was missing for me was that there weren't enough women in the industry, and there still are not. And the women who were there or are there are not getting a microphone often enough. So when I was at Chrysler, I made a point of bringing out and giving more visibility to female dealers, female engineers, other women in the industry. And then when Chrysler blew up, as most everybody knows, and my division was sold. In fact, they really just bought the assets, not even the people, really. And everybody scattered. So I came back to the East Coast, and I did public speaking and journalism and consulting, more focused now on the green economy, because I'd been to all these conferences. I got to know all these people. I'd met all these amazing, and I loved it. I was like, I fell in love, right? And someone I met at a conference said, I would like you to do a radio show on our network.
Wow. Somebody just that you met arbitrarily said, we'd like you to do a show on our network.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So
what was your reaction to that initially?
My reaction to that initially was, great, I can put some ideas that I've had to work, and that I wanted to use it to help increase the visibility of women. And the reason I called it Green Connections Radio is because I'm a big connector. It's connecting people to people. It's connecting people to ideas. It's connecting partnerships, companies to innovators. That's how, you do this too. That's how the world moves, is by making connections, right? And green to me was about the purpose part, and the planet part. And I wrestled with whether I should put the word women in the name, but I decided that I was just going to feature women, and it was really about the connections. So what I do is I interview women, innovators, and leaders who work in corporate responsibility, energy and sustainability, and diversity work. So, and I'd love to have you on my show, by the way. Now that I know that you exist, I had no idea that you existed before your folks got in touch. And these are amazing people. These are all across the board. In the last couple days, I've interviewed a woman who does gender training and gender issues from politics to business around the world. And I interviewed a woman who's an expert in electric vehicles and electric vehicle policy. And I interviewed a woman who is in major corporate America running a sustainability innovation program. And another woman who's leading a new center through the Atlantic Council on resilience to help cities become more resilient to climate change. And in fact, to use how to become more resilient to climate change as a way to boost their own economy and make it a positive.
Wow. And so on this journey of speaking to so many women who have backgrounds in science and technology and engineering and math, what are we learning about how to pass the possibility of other girls? We know that boys and men have inhabited this field. What are they saying about what we need to do to empower this upcoming generation?
Role models make a big difference. And in fact, I did a video when I was first launching my show, and because I interviewed a bunch of college age young ladies, and they all said, we don't have enough role models of women in these fields. And they couldn't see themselves there because, frankly, all the people they saw were white men. And they needed to see themselves, right? You can't always picture yourself in a role if you don't see somebody else like you doing it. The other thing we can do is make it relevant to their lives. So, for example, I interviewed these 3 terrific high school girls who came in second in a contest that NASA did for STEM innovation in high schools. Mm-hmm. And they came up with a very creative water filtration system for their own school.
Wow.
They didn't like the taste of the water in their school water fountain. And so they put their heads together and came up with this cool water filtration system, which ended up winning them an award from NASA.
Amazing.
And it's amazing, right? So if you empower them to say, here's what you can do in your world. Here's how it can make a difference in your world, in your high school, in your drinking fountain. And here's how it can make a difference in your community. And make it cool and fun. You know, a lot of kids still think it's sitting in some way solo or in a lab or whatever, but it's very social. And especially the green economy, because it's got this purpose attached to it, right? It's solving problems that are critical to mankind.
Absolutely.
And womankind.
Absolutely. And I never really thought about giving kids a challenge, saying, if you're not happy with this, how can you think to change it?
Exactly.
And that's what they did. And I think that we're going to have to start pushing our young people a little bit more to dig down into the depths of what's there, to begin to excavate that so that the world can use it. One of the things that you do in your spare time is you write for Forbes magazine. Talk about how that happened and many of the lessons that you've been able to learn.
Well, I started writing for Forbes because, frankly, I also do consulting and coaching. And one of my clients had been writing for Forbes and connected me to some folks there. And one thing led to another, and it came together. I mean, I'm kind of a published quantity, so it wasn't a huge leap. But also, they have a vertical that focuses mostly on women. And it's women entrepreneurs, and it's women intrapreneurs, as I call us, people who are innovating in large companies. And it's women who are figuring out their professional journey. And, you know, you asked about being an entrepreneur. I like to focus on women in mid-career, which is really kind of a flexible timeline. So wherever you feel like you're just in the middle, right?
Right.
And that's about finding your voice, finding people who support who you are today. Because we all know that there are people who, I don't know about you, but I've moved around the country several times. And every time I move, it's really interesting to notice who stays in my world and who doesn't. And who comes into my world and who doesn't. And it's like exfoliating, you know, it's like you're shedding.
I like that. It's like exfoliating. That's good.
I mean, you're shedding the old and bringing in to make room for the new, right? And we evolve as people. So you'll have different people who support different parts of who you are in different aspects of your life. And so it's about finding your voice today, being present with that today and with whoever you're speaking with today and whatever you're doing, and evolving, allowing that to evolve and see the opportunities around that. And sometimes it's being an entrepreneur. Sometimes that can be in the shape of having a side hustle. One of the things that I just want to point out, and I did some stories on this, is when you are working for a big company and you're developing an entrepreneurship on the side or a side hustle, check your employee agreement because they may own your side hustle.
Oh, wow.
and you might not know it. So you have to make sure on that. I just want to protect anybody who's listening and watching.
But don't you find, though, Joan, has it been your experience, because since we've been on this journey, I find that more women in my age group, middle-aged, are really trying to find the courage to come out of what has become drudgery, or maybe let me digress a little bit. Their season is over where they are, and they want to move into that thing that they really love, but they really just don't know how to do it. What do we say to those women?
We say to them, own that and find. And it's interesting because a lot of my clients are transitioning from one career to the other. Look at what you can do as a skill and as a function, if you will, marketing, finance, IT, how that can fit into where you want to go and what you want to develop. So, for example, if you're working in an accounting firm and you just don't want to do, and you're an accountant and you don't want to do that anymore, any business can use accounting skills. The beauty of the green economy, of energy and sustainability in particular, is it's a pretty new field. And so it's easier there's a lot of creative opportunity, there's a lot of cool people doing it, and it's automatically purpose driven. Women make career decisions based more on purpose and values. And you're making a difference just by working in the field.
I love that. And so the green space is really open. Educate us a little bit on the opportunities and how women especially can begin to take that next step and to see if that's something that they can feel purposeful about.
Well, they can do a lot of reading, obviously. They can go to conferences, they can go to networking events, they can talk to people. They can read my blogs and subscribe to my stuff and get some information on that too. It really depends on each individual person. Sometimes it's writing about it in your LinkedIn profile or on Medium, and finding a way to transfer to show how your skills apply in that other industry, by doing some research into that other space that you want to be in, and saying, well, okay, I like this, and here's my take. So own your voice, own your talent. A lot of times women say, oh, but I haven't done this. Yes, but you have done this. Focus on what you can do. I had a guest, I interviewed Angela Duckworth, who wrote a book on grit, which I loved. And it's all about how success is about talent, not.
I haven't read that book, but it's on my list.
Yeah, it's great. Listen to my interview with her, and I wrote about it too. It's great. But the point is, it's about what you put into it, and it's about your interest and your connection to it, right? So if you dive into it and you just find your way in, because everything that anybody does is applicable to just about any industry, because every business, every nonprofit, every government agency needs HR, organization, finance, IT, marketing, and the chances are one of those functions is where you've had your expertise. The other thing is, if you're coming back into the workforce or you're transitioning, there's a lot of companies now that are doing what they call returnships, where they're bringing in women who have been either out of the workforce to raise children or something related, and giving them an opportunity to get a paid position to get back into the industry and hone up on their skills and get some other training. You're not coming in at the level that you left at necessarily,
right?
But you're also entering a new industry that you might want to be in. Let me tell you a story. So I had a woman come to me once who said, well, I just retired from being a Foreign Service officer for 28 years and I want to get into the green economy. I don't have anything that's related. And I said, of course you do. You know, you've been a diplomat, you've been negotiating, you've been solving policy questions. The green economy is filled with policy issues. Focus on where your intersection is into that new industry. And also, the beauty is in today's world, you can try the dress on before you buy it, right?
I love it.
You can check out an industry and talk to people, do what I call informational interviews. Read something that somebody wrote and ask them for 10 minutes or buy an hour of their time as a consulting time. One of my colleagues does Rent Your Brain, which is what I've adopted. So I now do Rent Your Brain for certain situations, where you can get, it's like a 1 hour or so quick coaching session to give you ideas to kind of get you unstuck and figure out where you fit. Because a lot of times we get so stuck in our own stuff and our own day-to-day. And this requires, when you want to transition like you're describing, you need to step back and say, well, what can I do? What do I do well? What do people tell me I do well?
Right.
What do I feel like I do well? What do I feel pride when I do? What do I feel proud of having done? But sometimes when my clients get depressed or down on themselves, I tell them to go read their resume or read their bio. But, a lot of it, and I want to make this point because it's really important, and you know this intuitively, it's about what we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
Self-talk is huge. Self-talk and self-compassion. You won't always say the right thing. You won't always make the right decision. You won't always, fill in the blank. But you make the right decision and you say what you think is appropriate at that moment.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
But it's what we tell ourselves. If we say, oh, you're an idiot, you screwed that up, then you're going to bring yourself down.
Right.
If you say, hey, you put yourself out there, you gave it a shot, good girl, makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely.
Because when you feel good about it, it opens up possibilities, and then you can see possibilities.
Indeed. Possibility is probably one of my most favorite words in the English language. You speak to all of our possibility, and we want to thank you for the work that you're doing and the possibility that you opened up for our listeners and viewers this morning, just in sowing that one seed, that green connections are open for possibility. Before we've got to let you go, Joan, tell people how they can connect with you, your podcast, all of the things that you're writing, and how they can reference all of the things that you have available.
Oh, that's very sweet. Well, my website is greenconnectionsradio.com, and connections is plural. I write for Forbes, so you can find me. If you put in Joan Michelson Forbes, I'll pop up instantly. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very Googleable. And I'm sure that they can find me through your platform.
Absolutely.
Because they'll see me there and they'll see the spelling of my name or what have you. And please, anybody who is an OPT listener in the audience, if you reach out to me, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm pretty ubiquitous. Please mention that you heard me or saw me on OPT and give a shout out to Carlette. And the OPT team.
You're so kind. Joan, we have many, many more conversations to expand upon. We want to thank you for taking the time, and we want to thank you for being a woman that is empowering other women. You are a true cheerleader to all of us.
Thank you.
Indeed. Joan Michelson, everybody. She is an award-winning business and communications leader. Look her up. We want to thank Joan Michelson. You see, women like Joan speak to possibility. Anytime you can multitask and do various different things and find what you love, that's really how you find your passion. So many people stay stuck. I was reading a meditation this morning, and it was talking about really sort of wearing the world like a loose garment. Sometimes we take ourselves and our situations so seriously that we are locked into the things that we know and that we understand. And we don't leave room for anything else because we don't think it's possible. We look around ourselves and we see what others are doing, and we think it's only possible for them. And if you really believe that lie, that is the first thing that is holding you back. yourself. Most of us can't get out of our own way to find out what else is in us. And so ultimately, we just do what we've always done. And when we do what we've always done, we get what we always get. There's not room for anything different. And I like when Joan said, she said, I just took the leap. The company liked my skill set. They didn't think that I necessarily needed to know how to do the job, but what they understood was her capability and her capacity to do the job. So many people stay on jobs well past their season. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's wonderful for those people who can stay on jobs for decades. But when you stay on a job for a decade and you start to feel, or decades, and you start to feel stifled, like you're not growing, like you're not learning, then it's time to take the leap into the next thing. You see, what these jobs and the longevity on a job does is it gives you different skill sets. And that's what Joan started learning. She had skills that she wasn't putting to use. How exciting is it to be able to do something different and put another part of your brain to work that you never even knew existed? It's fulfilling. It's satisfying. And I'm going to tell you the reason why we wake up every single morning and we try to have the most in-depth conversations that we can have with people about how they're doing what it is that they're doing is to empower all of us and to speak to all of our possibilities. They are endless. But the thing of it is that most of us are too afraid to explore our possibilities. So we stay in the box. People who are really having great success and great joy are the people who, they're afraid to get out of the box too, some of them. But they open up the box and they take the leap. And they say, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then they start to weigh it out. Okay, the worst possible thing that could happen is that I'm not successful. And then when you get past, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be successful or not, and you start doing the work, and you start to love it and enjoy it, even if it doesn't have the success that you think that it should, you learn something for the next journey. Life is a series of preparations, getting us ready for each encounter. And if you don't ever step out, you'll never know what's ahead. And that's why these conversations are important. They make us think about it. Everybody who steps out of the boat is afraid. They're afraid they're going to drown. But guess what? We find a way to float. Joan did it. You can do it too. That's my final point, on point today. Stay with us. We're back to wrap up right after this.